The letter came in a cream-colored envelope, edges slightly curled from age, her name written in the kind of ink you could only get from a fountain pen. Eleanor hadn't seen handwriting like that since 1978, and as she stood in her kitchen, one hand trembling slightly as it held the envelope, the other gripping the back of a chair for balance, she whispered something to herself, though she wouldn't remember what. Outside, the wind pulled dry leaves across the porch. Inside, her entire past turned over in her chest like it had been waiting in silence for this moment. She didn't open it right away. No, she made tea first, her joints aching as she reached for the kettle. Earl Grey, like always. She sat at the old oak table facing the window, the letter unopened on the placemat beside her, her mug steaming quietly. In the distance, just beyond the tree line, the faintest glint of the lake shimmered under the afternoon sun. She didn't look at it. She looked at the envelope. 3 days earlier, she had turned 70. There was cake, balloons, a granddaughter with purple hair who cried during the toast and hugged her too hard. She'd felt every breath of it, the love, the attention, the small ache that grew in her chest when everyone was gone. But this envelope, this was different. This wasn't nostalgia or sentiment. This was something old and alive. Eleanor took a breath and opened it. The paper inside was thick and elegant. She unfolded it slowly, like peeling back a part of herself. Her hands shook. Eleanor, I know this is unexpected. I don't know if you remember me, though I can't imagine you don't. We met in the fall of 1975 in upstate New York. You were at the lake house with your friend Marianne. I was the one who crashed the wedding party next door. I owe you a long explanation. I've owed it for nearly 50 years. If you're still curious, if your heart still wonders, come to the corner of Preston and Waverly in New York City. Sunday at noon. I'll be the man sitting at the red piano. R. Eleanor read it twice, then 3 times. But there it was, forming in her mind again like smoke curling upward in an empty room. Ryan. Not Ryan Gosling. Not the movie star, the heartthrob, the impossibly kind-eyed Hollywood icon. No, not just that. It was him. The man she'd met before the world knew his name. Before any of it. In 1975, Eleanor was 20 years old, impulsive, sharp-tongued, with dreams she didn't yet know how to name. She'd gone with her college roommate Mary into a lake house for a weekend party, something vaguely bohemian and recklessly full of wine and music. And he had been there, someone's friend of a friend. Tall, lean, sunburned, wearing an old leather jacket over a faded t-shirt, playing piano in the corner while everyone else danced. He wasn't famous then. Not even close. He wasn't even acting professionally yet. But there was something about him, an intensity that made you feel like you were the only person in the world when he looked at you. And God, had he looked at her. That weekend had felt like falling into a song. They hadn't even kissed until the second night. Then everything spiraled, wild and golden and slow and fast all at once. She remembered his fingers on her wrist, the way he played with the ends of her hair, the way they'd gone swimming at midnight in the freezing lake, how he'd made her laugh so hard she cried. He had told her things she hadn't believed at the time, that he felt like the world had something waiting for him, that sometimes he dreamed in color so bright it hurt his eyes, that she reminded him of the women in old movies, not the actresses, but the ones the camera loved even when they were just sitting still. And then, on the morning they were supposed to leave, he was gone. No note. No explanation. His jacket still draped over the porch railing. She waited. She wrote one letter. It came back, unopened. Marian said he probably just got scared. Life moved on. She married someone else. Raised children. Buried him in 2004. Watched her daughter grow up. Watched the world change. Saw Ryan Gosling's face appear in a movie trailer one day in 2001 and nearly dropped her coffee cup. She hadn't said anything. Not then. Not ever. And now, this letter. At 11:12 on Sunday morning, Eleanor stepped onto the subway platform wearing her best coat and a pair of earrings she hadn't worn since Reagan was president. The train was late. Her breath clouded the air. She looked around and felt her heart thudding in a way she hadn't allowed it to in decades. Part of her wanted to laugh at herself. The other part wanted to scream. By the time she reached the corner of Preston and Waverly, the sky had darkened. Not stormy, just heavy. The air held a scent like something was about to begin. The red piano was there, just like the letter had said. Not inside a building. Not under cover. Just on the sidewalk in front of an old bookstore. People walked past, mostly ignoring it, like it had always been there. And sitting at it, just as promised, was a man. Not quite the man she remembered. Older. His hair grayer, shorter. gloves, and he was playing softly, gently, something that sounded like moonlight would if it could hum. He looked up. Their eyes met. For a second, less than that, the world froze. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. Instead, he slid over on the piano bench and patted the space beside him. She sat. They said nothing for a while. Then he spoke, his voice low, familiar, the edges softer now. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered." Eleanor laughed, and it sounded like heartbreak and wonder all at once. "You're late." He turned toward her, his fingers still on the keys. "Only by 49 years and 8 months." She looked at him, long and hard. "Why now?" Ryan inhaled. "Because I didn't think I deserved to until now." And with that, he began to tell her the story. Not just of where he'd been, but of everything. Ryan's fingers still hovered above the piano keys, though the music had quieted. His eyes never left hers. He looked older, yes, but not faded, not worn. He looked like a man who had learned the full weight of silence. And Eleanor, sitting beside him in the cold afternoon light, felt her own age peel away in invisible layers, like the years had waited patiently for this reunion to make sense. "I left that morning," he began, "because I thought I was saving you." She didn't speak. Not yet. Her breath caught, but her eyes stayed on him. "You were this light, Ellie. And I was a fuse." He chuckled, almost bitterly, glancing down at his hands. "I was already screwing things up in ways you couldn't see. I hadn't told you everything. About who I was. Where I came from. I was couch surfing, hustling between gigs in the city, pretending I had it figured out. But I didn't. I was terrified." Eleanor kept still, her gloves pressed together in her lap. "I told myself that you'd forget me. That someone better would come along. Someone safer. And when I started getting small roles, moving up, God, it only got worse. I saw you everywhere. In the women I passed on the street. In the way someone would tilt their head and laugh, and it sounded just like you. I even named a character after you once. In a short film. Nobody noticed." She smiled, painfully. "I noticed." He turned sharply to her. "You saw it. I watched everything you did." Ryan blinked, visibly moved, like the words had broken open something inside him. "I didn't know. I didn't want you to." For a moment, the noise of the city came alive around them, cars passing, heels on concrete, a child crying somewhere across the street. But at that piano bench, time had stilled again. "I almost came back in '89, he said. "You were living in New Jersey by then. I flew out. I stood across the street from your house. You had a dog, a beagle, I think? Lucy." Her voice cracked. "She barked at me. Loudly." They both laughed then, quietly, like old lovers who had finally stopped pretending they weren't still carrying each other. "I didn't knock," he said. "You had a husband. A life. I had no right." Eleanor looked away, eyes glistening. "He was kind. Safe. And nothing like you." Ryan's smile faded, but not from pain. From understanding. "I lost him a long time ago," she added, softly. "Cancer." "I'm sorry," he said, and she knew he meant it. "Why now, Ryan?" He looked at her with something fragile behind his gaze. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm not scared of what comes next." She felt her throat tighten. "And what is next?" Ryan leaned forward, elbows on knees, his breath fogging in the cold. "You." Eleanor felt something shift inside her, like a door she didn't know was still locked finally clicking open. They sat there in silence for a long while, listening to the pulse of the city, to the distant hum of life going on. She glanced sideways at him, at the lines in his face, at the man she had loved when neither of them knew what that meant. And then, almost casually, he asked, "Do you want to go inside?" She blinked. "Inside where?" He gestured toward the bookstore behind them. "I bought it." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Well, not all of it. I co-own it. With a friend. Retired musician. It's quiet. There's coffee. And they let me keep the piano out here." She followed him through the door. Inside, the air was warm and soft, scented faintly with old paper and cinnamon. The store was narrow but deep, with wooden floors and mismatched shelves and velvet armchairs that looked like they'd hosted more than a few whispered secrets. He led her toward the back, where a small alcove with 2 chairs and a lamp waited like it had been expecting them. They sat. For a while, they said nothing. He watched her trace the spine of an old poetry book left on the table. She watched his hands, which looked gentler now than they ever had in memory. "Tell me everything," she finally said. He did. He told her about the early roles, how he lived out of a car for nearly a year before anyone remembered his name, how the fame had hit like a wave he couldn't stop, and how, instead of swimming, he just held his breath. About the women, the stories, the nights he couldn't sleep, how none of them ever quite fit. Because none of them were her. She told him about her life, too, about raising a daughter, about losing her husband, about learning how to be alone without being lonely, about the way she'd always felt unfinished. Like there was one page missing from a story she couldn't quite forget. By the time they looked up, the sun had set, and the shop was nearly empty. "Stay with me," Ryan said. Eleanor blinked. "You don't even know who I am anymore." He reached for her hand. "I've always known who you are." Her heart beat so hard she wondered if he could hear it. "I don't need forever," he added. "Just now." She smiled, something between sorrow and disbelief. "That's the kind of thing you say in movies." He tilted his head. "Then let this be our movie." Outside, the wind picked up again, and she thought of the lake house, the way he'd kissed her neck that second night, the way she'd whispered his name like a prayer, the way she never stopped wondering. And now here he was, offering not a dream, but something real, something frighteningly real. "Okay," she said. Ryan blinked. "Okay." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Let's see what now looks like." They didn't sleep together that first night, not in the way people might imagine. He walked her to a nearby hotel, kissed her hand beneath a yellow streetlight, and said, "Tomorrow." And that was enough. The next morning, Eleanor awoke before dawn. She hadn't slept like that in years, not because she was tired, but because something deep inside her had exhaled. As if for the first time in decades, her body trusted the world enough to rest. She met him at the bookstore, just like before, only now the air between them had changed. Warmer, fuller, like the world had tilted slightly, just enough for their lives to finally align. They walked the city for hours. Ryan insisted on showing her everything he loved: quiet parks tucked behind libraries, the florist with the green awning who gave him a rose every week for no reason, the tiny French cafe where they made bread so soft it felt like memory in your mouth. They talked about regrets. "I should have fought harder," she said once, her voice thin in the early morning air. "I should have stayed," he replied. But they didn't dwell there. They chose, again and again, to look forward. He invited her into his home the following week. It was nothing like she expected: modest, elegant, full of odd treasures. A pair of ballet slippers hung on a nail beside the doorway. A framed photograph of the moon over the Pacific. A child's drawing pinned to the fridge, signed only with the name Evie. Eleanor pointed to it, one brow raised. Ryan hesitated. "My goddaughter," he said finally. "Sort of." She didn't press. Not then. Instead, she let herself sink into this new rhythm, waking up in the city, falling asleep to the sound of jazz on vinyl, drinking bitter coffee from chipped mugs while Ryan read to her in the mornings from old screenplays he'd never filmed. They danced once. Just in the living room. A record spinning. No words. He held her like something ancient and sacred, and she let her cheek rest against his chest, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of someone who had waited a lifetime to be whole again. But of course, peace has a way of testing itself. It started with a phone call. They were having breakfast, he was making pancakes, she was thumbing through a crossword, when the phone rang. He answered quickly, stepping into the hallway. His voice changed. It dropped into something clipped. Mechanical. Tense. She heard a name, Mara. Then, "No, I told you not to call this number." A pause. And then, "I said I'd handle it." When he returned, he was smiling, but too quickly. His eyes betrayed something else. "Work stuff," he said. Eleanor didn't believe him. Not fully. But she didn't ask. 3 days later, the photo surfaced. She wasn't looking for it. Eleanor didn't scroll tabloids. But her granddaughter, Lila, sent it in a text. Grammy? Is this who I think it is?" The image was grainy but unmistakable. Ryan Gosling. At a rooftop bar. Holding hands with a much younger woman in a red coat. The caption, "Spotted. Gosling's secret romance?" Eleanor felt a coldness settle in her chest like dust. She didn't confront him that day. She waited. She watched. He was kind, attentive, made her tea, rubbed her feet, told her he was falling in love with her in a voice so soft it nearly undid her. But when he kissed her cheek that night, something behind her ribs recoiled. She left early the next morning, saying she had errands. She didn't. Instead, she went back to the bookstore, to the piano. The stool was empty. Inside, she found the same clerk from before, the older man with silver hair and ink-stained hands. "Has Ryan been in today?" she asked. The man frowned. "Ryan." She nodded. "Ryan. The one who plays the piano outside." The man blinked. "Ma'am, that piano's been locked for weeks. We haven't had anyone play it since Christmas." She froze. "That's impossible. We were just here." He tilted his head gently. Maybe you saw someone else, but Ryan doesn't work here. Never has. Her breath turned shallow. Are you sure? Lady, the man said kindly. I'm the only one who's run this shop since '09. She left, legs trembling, heart pounding in her chest like a drumbeat of denial. The city felt unfamiliar suddenly, too loud, too fast. She called him. No answer. She went to his apartment. No response. She waited outside for hours. No sign. That night, she went home. Not to the hotel. Not to the bookstore. Not to him. Her own house. The one she hadn't set foot in for weeks. She sat on the edge of her bed, removed her earrings, and cried without sound. The next morning, there was a letter waiting on her porch. Same cream envelope. Same handwriting. Inside, Eleanor, I'm sorry, not for loving you, but for not knowing how to love you honestly. There are things I should have told you. About Mara. About why I disappeared. About what this really is. If you still want to know the truth, meet me where we began. The lake. She read it 3 times. The 4th time, she burned it. And then, 2 days later, she packed a bag. The lake house hadn't been touched in years. Marian had passed it on to her daughter, who used it once every summer. But Eleanor still had the key, still remembered the turns in the road, the trees that lined the driveway like witnesses. When she arrived, dusk was falling. The air smelled of pine and old water. She stood on the porch where they'd once danced barefoot, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to see him again. But then she heard it. Piano. Faint, echoing across the lake. She followed it. Down the path. Through the trees. Toward the dock where they'd swum at midnight. There he was, sitting at a collapsible keyboard under a canvas tarp, playing the melody he used to hum in his sleep. He didn't look up. He just kept playing. She stood at the edge of the dock, arms crossed, heart split wide open. I thought you said you'd changed, she said. He stopped playing. I have. Then tell me everything. He turned, and this time, his eyes didn't hide. You weren't the only one I disappeared from, he said. A pause. I have a daughter, Eleanor. I have a daughter, Eleanor. The wind shifted on the lake, pulling ripples across the surface like the skin of some living thing. Eleanor didn't move. She stood perfectly still at the edge of the dock, watching the man who had once held her heart in his hands and vanished with it like a ghost. He turned back to the piano, touched a single key, let it echo into the dusk. Her name is Mara. The name hit her like a blade through memory. The girl from the photo? Eleanor asked, voice carefully controlled. He nodded. Not what it looked like. She's 27, born in '98. Her mother was someone I cared about, briefly, but it didn't last. I didn't know about Mara until she was nearly 6. And you kept her hidden from the world? He gave a sad smile. I tried to keep her safe. There's a difference. Eleanor crossed her arms. You lied to me. I didn't lie, he said, gently. I just didn't tell you everything. I didn't want you to see the worst of me. Not until I was sure the best of me could still hold your love. For a long time, there was only the sound of wind and water and the fading tones of the keyboard, still humming with unfinished music. Eleanor stepped forward. You should have told me the moment I walked back into your life. I know. She was close enough now to see the lines around his eyes, deeper than before, drawn by grief and age and guilt. She saw the way his hand trembled slightly when he touched the keys. She found me a few years ago, he continued. Said she wanted nothing but a chance. I didn't know how to be a father to a grown woman. I didn't know how to be anyone real anymore. I spent my whole life playing parts. I forgot how to live honestly. And now I want to stop hiding. From her. From you. From all of it. Eleanor looked at the sky, how it bruised slowly into night, lavender bleeding into blue. Her heart felt like glass in her chest, full of cracks, and still somehow holding. You could have told me all this in the bookstore. I didn't want to lose what we had. You never had me, she said, not cruelly. Just true. Not completely. Ryan stood now. Came closer. Stood on the dock across from her like a man waiting for a verdict. And if I asked for one more chance, he said. She looked at him, this man with all his beauty and ache and mistakes, and remembered how it felt to be 20 again, swimming through moonlight and first love. You'd have to earn it. He smiled, something quiet and aching behind his eyes. I've waited half a lifetime for you. I'll wait the rest. She stepped forward. You won't have to. And with that, she kissed him. Not like in the movies. Not full of fireworks or swelling music. But like two people who had finally put down the weight of who they thought they had to be and saw each other clearly, at last. They stayed at the lake for 3 days, Mornings were slow. She made coffee. He read aloud from books they found in the dusty cabinet above the fireplace. They hiked once, slowly, along the old path behind the waterline, where the trees grew in silence and the world felt newly made. One night, Ryan told her everything about his years in LA, the women, the breakdown in 2011 no one knew about. How he once sat in a hotel room staring at a mirror for 6 hours, wondering if the man staring back was worth saving. How did you come back from that? Eleanor asked, her head resting on his chest. You, he said. Even when I lost you, you were still the part of me I protected. She said nothing. Just listened to his heartbeat. On the 4th day, they returned to the city. She didn't go home. Instead, she went with him to his small apartment in Queens. 3rd floor walk-up. She met Mara. The woman who answered the door had her father's eyes. Not in color, but in weight. Like she'd been carrying truth for too long. Mara didn't speak right away. Just looked at Eleanor like she was the missing page of a story she wasn't allowed to read until now. I know who you are, Mara said finally. Eleanor smiled softly. Do you? He watched them, father and daughter, and Eleanor saw something heal in him, something collapse and rebuild in real time. Over tea, Mara asked. Why now? Eleanor thought for a long time. Because the past doesn't go away. And if you're lucky, it gives you one more chance to make peace with it. They talked until midnight. About love. About time. About how life often waits until you stop trying to control it before it gives you what you've been missing all along. 3 months later, Ryan sold the apartment. They moved into a cottage just outside Rhinebeck. A porch. A garden. An old record player that skipped during Billie Holiday songs. He didn't make movies anymore. He wrote instead. Stories. Memoirs. Little pieces of his soul. Eleanor painted. Badly. But he loved every canvas. On their first anniversary, they went back to the lake. Sat on the dock. Held hands. I'm glad you found me, she whispered. He kissed her palm. You were never lost. She looked at him, older now, grayer, but radiant in a way that had nothing to do with youth, and thought, love doesn't always come on time. But when it's real, it waits. And in that stillness, in the hush of the trees, in the lap of water, she finally forgave the years. And let herself begin again.